Number 10, Venom. Now, of course, I'm going to start with Eddie Brock. I mean, this dude made his first appearance in The Amazing Spider-Man 252. Venom was initially attached to Peter Parker, obviously, hence everything, aka Spider-Man. So before that, it even bonded with Deadpool briefly. God, I would pay to see that on the big screen. Still would be R-rated. Has to be at that point. It didn't last very long though, so eventually it moved on and found none other than Eddie Brock. Cue Topher Grace cringe. After being part of the Kree-Skrull War, he's actually an anti-hero, despite how he may look. And the teeth. The teeth give away a lot. I was excited to see him in Spider-Man 3, as most of you probably were, because Spider-Man 2 is still one of the best superhero movies, hands down. Fight me. I don't know. So once I heard about the villains in Spider-Man 3, I was pumped. Why? I mean, so once Spider-Man released the symbiote and it bonded to him, he became stronger. He got unlimited webbing, regeneration. He realized that this suit is literally alive. So after Eddie Brock got fired from the Daily Globe, after Spider-Man called him out, oops, Eddie Brock, who also had cancer, got pretty pissed. And as you saw in Spider-Man 3, he eventually bonded with the symbiote at the Bell Tower. Then it was all downhill from there. We are Venom, two become one. So naturally they both wanted to go and try to go after Spider-Man. Imagine having a fully sentient being merge with you. I think I'd be on board. Hey, touch this and you'll be Spider-Man. Okay, done, no problem, no questions asked. The symbiote is able to cling on to other beings and bond with other superpowers. Its weaknesses are heat and loud vibrations. So like I said, it can bond with other superpowers or other superheroes, like the Green Goblin, which I'll save for later.
Number 9. Probably the oldest of the new symbiotes on this list. I made a mistake trying to pronounce that, is a peculiar symbiote, which feeds on the host's brains rather than adrenaline. So much so that in Realm of King's Imperial Guard number 5, when it was separated from its host Razzle Longknife, it was launched at the corrupted Charles Xavier of the Cancerverse, who was basically a giant brain monster, and it began to eat him. This one's bizarre.
And at number 8, Kroba. Kroba is likely the least known symbiote on our list, but just one look at it screams frightening. So Kroba is an entity that comes from the pits of darkness, naturally. It bonded with a scientist and drives him mad, causing him to go on a rampage of New York, which when you really think about it is unsurprisingly common in the Marvel universe it seems. It's also one of the only symbiote characters to appear in the comics that doesn't have some sort of familial connection to Venom, and isn't one of his offspring, first appearing in Venom's Seed of Darkness in 1997. But despite its appearance, it went down in a pretty lackluster way, being defeated by Eddie Brock thanks to the flash on his camera. Speaking of, in at number 7, Riot. Riot has been getting a lot more attention these days, thanks to his upcoming cinematic debut in the Sony Venom film, starring Tom Hardy as Eddie Brock. Now Riot is one of Scream's siblings. It bonded with Trevor Cole, a particularly aggressive and unhinged mercenary working as part of the Life Foundation security team. Riot is known for being the largest symbiote of the 5, and often uses very aggressive and violent tactics in combat. He often created large bludgeoning weapons from his arms, along the lines of hammers or maces, and tended to be considered the strongest out of the group, although his exact strength level was never really elaborated on. After he and his siblings were defeated by Eddie Brock, they were all shipped off to the Vault, a prison for superhuman criminals that had a wing specifically for extraterrestrial threats. There he was experimented on, pretty cruelly, and then in the Planet of the Symbiotes story arc in 1995, Venom, in an attempt to subdue an invasion of symbiotes, let out a powerful telekinetic scream that caused them so much pain that they all committed suicide, actually a thing, which then affected Riot and his siblings. Moving on to our number 6, Laura Kinney. Laura Kinney's Venomized self is absolutely terrifying. First appearing in Edge of Venomverse issue 1 back in August of 2017, the character has an interesting story. From Earth TRN 645, the character's origin is similar to her Earth 616 counterparts. Raised as an assassin called X-23 in the facility that cloned her from Wolverine, she continuously attempted to escape imprisonment, and on her 5th try, she accidentally punctured a tank that contained a confined Venom symbiote. The symbiote bonded with her and boosted her powers, allowing her to finally break out of the facility for good. She fled to New York, made a derelict bank her home, which then caused locals to fear that the building was haunted. Eventually though, she encountered the Runaways, who were fleeing the gangster known as Zebra Daddy. Fun name. Rather than listening to Venom and eating the group of kids, she aided them, killing the gangster and his thugs, and sharing her home with the Runaways. Her symbiote has been known to further separate itself into other pieces to bond with others in order to protect them. In other words, the Runaways, who she has a fondness for. But the symbiote can always be recalled. Eventually though, agents from the facility had hunted her down, but before she could make a stand against them, she was summoned by the Venomized Doctor Strange. During the war, she would take up the alias of Wolverine, and managed to survive the battle and return back home to her reality. Also, another neat tidbit of information about her is that she would constantly be at odds with her Venom symbiote, not wanting to fight or kill unless she had to. And, well, That's kind of Venom's jam most of the time, isn't it?
Number 5. Anti-venom. Also an anti-hero, this non-sentient symbiote made its first appearance in The Amazing Spider-Man issue 671. Anti-venom was born at the Feast Center in New York City. So in the New Ways to Die storyline, Eddie Brock and the Venom symbiote have parted ways. And Eddie Brock has cancer. What a bummer. Martin Lee comes in and saves the day and bam, cures the big C. But in doing so, he infused trace amounts of the leftover Venom symbiote with his white blood cells. Oops! So while that was cooking up inside, Mac Gargan, the Scorpion, who was part of the Thunderbolts, and he was the current host of the Venom symbiote. So this anti-venom comes along and fuses with him, and it's pretty sweet. Being one of the white blood cells, he actually has the ability to heal people. He can sense if you got something wrong going on inside, like like an ear infection or I don't know, some more serious disease. He can create antibodies to attack whatever it is. How clutch is that? Flash Thompson actually wore the suit in the storyline too. Super neat. Check it out.
Number 4. Scorn. Scorn is the offspring of Carnage after the symbiote escaped from its containment cell and left its offspring within Tranus Neve's prosthesis. After Shriek took Neves hostage, Neves got near the new symbiote and became one with it, creating Scorn. Sadly, the fate of Scorn does not look good, as during the events of Web of Venom Carnage Born number 1, the recently reborn Cletus Cassidy ripped out Tranus' spine, presumably killing her and absorbing her symbiote as he had so many others.
Up next in our number 3 spot, Grendel. Grendel, compared to some of the other characters on this list, hasn't had a whole lot of panel time, but that doesn't make Grendel any less terrifying. So this creature is a dragon symbiote that was a servant of Knull. More on Knull later. Grendel would take on Eddie Brock's Venom and Miles Morales' Spider-Man in the 2018 Venom run, Volume 4. Grendel has the blood of multiple civilizations on his, I guess, teeth, not really hands. It ravaged societies during the earlier medieval period, including Norse soldiers, which caused Thor to trap it inside of a glacier in response. Flash forward to 1966. S.H.I.E.L.D. discovers Grendel and ran many an experiment on it, which ultimately led to a bunch of destruction by Grendel in Vietnam during the war. It would later be incapacitated and put to sleep until it was awakened by Knull and unleashed on New York. See, there's a trend there with these symbiotes going after New York. To make matters worse, this symbiote dragon isn't affected by sonic waves or heat, and rather was defeated thanks to Thor's lightning and Spider-Man's Venom blast, which caused it to destabilize and unravel into a giant amorphous mass. Man, I hate when I unravel into a giant amorphous mass. Not a good day. Moving on to number 2, Toxin. Toxin, being Carnage's offspring, has been long considered the strongest of the symbiotes. Now, Carnage was disgusted by his offspring and hated it, especially since he knew he would become stronger than he was. With Carnage being his father, this makes Venom his grandfather. Now, Carnage tried to kill Toxin, whereas Venom tried to protect it, the intention of raising it to become his partner, but was also a little bit concerned about Toxin since he was the 1000th symbiote of their line, and feared that he might go insane due to a genetic breakdown. Now, Toxin can also do some pretty cool stuff. He has inherited the abilities of his lineage, like sticking to walls and the ability to shift his identity. He can blend into his surroundings to become practically invisible and undetectable. He has unlimited webbing, and he can form solid weapons from his limbs. But in addition to that, he has a much more accelerated healing ability compared to his father, exceptional tracking abilities, and prefers to not take over the host's minds. Rather, listens to their opinions instead. He has a stronger resistance to heat and sonic-based attacks too compared to Carnage, and has a venomous bite. In at number 1, Venomverse Carnage. If our part 1 of this list made anything clear, it's that the Clintar symbiotes grow stronger the further down the lineage they go, meaning Venom's offspring will inevitably be innately stronger than he is. This is why the Venomverse Carnage tops our list this time around. Now, for starters, this Carnage comes from an Earth in which he had successfully killed Venom. When he was summoned to fight in the war against the Clintars and the Poisons, he didn't get along well with the Resistance at first, and actually fought against them. Eventually though, he gave up on his volatile ways, realizing that this war gave him the opportunity to battle what he called a bunch of messed up superheroes, eventually fighting alongside them. Unfortunately for this Carnage, he was eventually used in a ploy against the Poisons by the poison-turned Venompool that we just talked about, in order to infiltrate the Hive spaceship, where he was essentially left for dead, although it is unconfirmed whether or not he survived when the Hive was destroyed in Venomverse issue 5. It seems pretty likely though.
Number 10. Miles Morales Symbiote. That was fast. After being infected with an offshoot of the Grendel symbiote by Carnage, the symbiote took control of Miles and transformed him into a 6-armed Carnage doppelganger. And for those unaware, I'm referring to the character doppelganger. Strong enough to contend with Venom, the Miles Morales symbiote proved exceptionally dangerous, enough that Venom was willing to kill Miles to stop it. but was stopped by Eddie. It briefly also took hold of Jonah Jameson, but Miles chose to rebond with it so that he could use it to fight Dark Carnage, and briefly overcame its will. Sadly, this didn't last, and Miles succumbed to the symbiote, attacking Eddie. Fortunately, Eddie was able to kill the symbiote when he channeled electricity through Captain America's shield and finally freed Miles from its grasp.
Up next, number 9, Venomized Gwenpool. Gwendolyn Poole from Earth TRN-646, much like many of the other characters on this list, is essentially Gwenpool of her own Earth, which is Earth TRN-565, but hosting the Venom symbiote. In case you're out of the loop about the very awesome Gwenpool, her home reality is one in which she understands that the Marvel Universe is fiction, yet manages to manifest herself within Earth 616's universe. The Venomized version of her, though, first appeared in Edge of Venomverse issue 2 in September of 2017, and she decides to turn on her boss and lawyer, Mr. Melville, after she reveals to him Daredevil's true secret identity. Her Venom symbiote influences her to kill him, justifying the act as the only way to keep Daredevil's secret a secret from the public. So she does, and it kinda pays off because she does work with Daredevil to fight the Hand. But unfortunately for her, she was eventually killed off in the same issue as she appeared in, by a Poison, who was impersonating an alternate version of Daredevil, who then ate her whole. Rough way to go.
Number 8, Toxin. Yep, the 1000th Spawn, first appearing in Venomverse Carnage number 2 in 2004. So when Carnage was giving birth to Toxin, Carnage initially wanted to destroy the Spawn, because once Toxin was finally born, Carnage was too weak by the process to even kill it. Venom, on the other hand, wanted to raise the Spawn and train it, and even named it Toxin after itself. What a nice name. New York City cop Pat Mulligan then became the host of the symbiote. So Patrick actually left his wife and kid because this thing was too unpredictable and powerful. Good call, Pat. So Venom and Carnage saw this police officer infused with Toxin and knew that it would most likely end up being a hero. So with his abilities to shapeshift, unlimited webbing, healing factor, tracking specialties, this guy can even hide himself in the blood of his host. Ew! They both obviously tried to kill it and of course failed. Toxin stands out from the rest of the symbiotes because, like I said earlier, he's spawn number 1000, he's special. But why? So every 1000 generations, the symbiote is born with what's called genetic memory breakdown. And since he was abandoned at a young age, he never really acted like a true symbiote. During a heated battle with Venom and Carnage, Toxin is aided by the web-slinger himself, Spider-Man, who's somewhere on my chest. After the unlikely duo defeats Venom and Carnage, Spider-Man gives them the cool dad talk and encourages them to just be better. I like Toxin a lot actually, he reminds me of like a bratty child. He broke Patrick's laptop after he referred to Toxin as a monster in an online blog, but he tried to make up for it by stealing a bag of laptops. What a sweetheart. What a gentle man. Toxin is the second hero in the symbiote family right after Hybrid.
In at number 7, Riot. Riot is one of the symbiotes who makes up one of our previous numbers, Hybrid, but he's arguably scarier on his own. The character who first appeared in Lethal Protector came to be after the Life Foundation removed multiple offspring seeds from Venom in hopes to use them as super soldiers. Riot, along with his siblings, were bonded to various mercenaries that worked for the Foundation, with his being Trevor Cole. Trevor was particularly volatile, described by his peers to be unhinged, thus making Riot a much more violent and vicious symbiote compared to his siblings, which is already saying a lot. Riot would later bond with the new host in hunting down Carnage, with a group formed by the government after being retrieved from his hybrid state, which would eventually lead him and his siblings into encountering Deadpool. Riot is also making his cinematic debut in this year's Venom movie, bonding with Riz Ahmed's Dr. Carlton Drake, who runs the Life Foundation. The character's origins will obviously be slightly altered, being with a different host, but since the Venom movie is removed from the symbiote Spider-Man alien costume storyline origin, that should be no surprise. In at 6, Hybrid. Riot and his siblings broke out of their confinement at the Vault after Venom's psychic shriek. They then merged into a super hybrid symbiote known aptly as Hybrid, who would then briefly bond with a character named Scott Washington, who was a guard at the Vault. Scott realized through bonding with Hybrid that Hybrid wasn't actually that much of a threat after all. Instead, the experiments they had undergone were causing it a lot of pain, and the symbiotes were actually the ones preventing Scott, who had a lot of anger issues, from being violent. Unfortunately for Hybrid and its desires to be a good-intentioned vigilante, Eddie Brock was on a mission to hunt down the symbiotes, and ended up killing Washington in the process. Hybrid would then be found by the US Army, be separated, and then be put to use as part of the Mercury team in order to fight Carnage. Needless to say, being the combination of Riot and the other symbiotes was significantly stronger than just a singular symbiote. Side note, the sibling symbiotes, Phage, Agony, and Lasher, didn't make this list because of how similar they were to Scream and Riot in terms of ability and power. Although Lasher was trained to bond with a dog named War Dog, which appeared in Carnage vs. Deadpool, and it's like really awesome. Symbiote dog. Speaking of Carnage though.
Number 5. Anti-Venom 2. Anti-Venom, aka Flash Thompson as Anti-Venom 2, came to be after Flash Thompson confronted Eddie Brock at Alchemax's astrobiology lab, wanting to return to being Agent Venom. Venom did not wish to choose between the two hosts, and much like any fool in a love triangle, attempted to have his cake and eat it too. or rather, eat both cakes, in that it tried to bond with Flash and Eddie at the same time. Spider-Man attempted to kill the symbiote and overturned one of the vats of anti-venom serum, dousing Flash in it, causing the symbiote biomass bonded to him to be altered into a replica of the original anti-venom symbiote. This version of the symbiote seems to have all the same powers of the original anti-venom, including superhuman strength, durability, and stamina. Sadly, Anti-Venom 2's appearance would only be brief, as Norman Osborn used the Carnage symbiote to become Red Goblin, and when Anti-Venom confronted him, he was able to kill Flash and the symbiote, ending his tenure as Anti-Venom.
Up next, number 4, Mania. Mania, also known as Maniac in later years, is one of the most vicious symbiotes to date. A clone of Venom, specifically cloned from Venom's tongue, this symbiote was initially created as a means of exterminating all life on Earth, but it refused to bond with any of the hosts that it was exposed to. Instead of bonding fully, Mania would bond and then brutally maul and murder each one of these potential hosts for fun. At one point, it comes into contact with a prospective host who is a prison inmate, who manages to reject the symbiote. So, how does Mania react? By bonding with an elderly mental patient and then taunting the inmate about how he was raped in prison, and then proceeded to reenact the assault before murdering him. All in all, pretty f***ed up character, yeah? Mania would go on to mass murder a bunch of individuals before a new host by the name of Lee Price took over the symbiote and then reshaped it, calling themselves Maniac instead. Up next, number 3, the Venomized Doctor Strange. Doctor Strange on his own in any Earth is pretty much a threat to be wary of, but in the Venomverse, he's the character who leads the Resistance, and the one who summons the Venoms from all of the other alternate realities to fight against the poisons. So his story in the Venomverse starts when he stumbled upon a Venom symbiote, who was on the run from the poisons. Once they bonded, he became privy to the threat that the poisons pose to the multiverse, so Strange concocts a plan to build the Resistance and take down the Poison Hive. He's eventually kidnapped by the poisons, and during the Resistance attempt to save him, they end up destroying the Hive, and he dies, but not before he manages to teleport all of the Resistance members back to their own home realities. What a guy.
Number 2, the Maker Hybrid. Hybrid itself has been around since 1996, but Hybrid during the Absolute Carnage arc attached itself to the Maker, aka Reed Richards, who honestly proves to be kind of a dick. Like, he's just a thinly veiled jerk to Dylan and Normie, prompting Dylan to, as he put it, do something stupid. So they obtain weapons, and upon firing, free the hybrid symbiotes, who immediately come together and absorb the Maker, creating a brand new hybrid. The Maker hybrid promptly pursues the boys, seeking to take the Codex out of Dylan. Despite the combined efforts of Hawkeye, Dylan, and Sleeper, the Maker hybrid manages to escape and flees into the sewer.
And finally, number 1, my personal favorite, Scream. Yeah, making its first appearance in Venom Lethal Protector number 4, this scary looking symbiote is one of the 5 Life Foundation symbiotes. Donna Diego, a Life Foundation volunteer, bonded with the symbiote and became Scream. Making a fun little appearance in the Venom movie, Donna Diego, a security guard from the Life Foundation, bonded with the symbiote, and she helped new hosts deal with their symbiotic merging. I imagine it's not too comfortable to have an alien race inside of your head and swirling around your body. Probably pretty uncomfortable. I thought growing was painful. Ooh. The coolest thing about her is that she uses her hair to fight. Like I said earlier, she is one of the Life Foundation symbiotes, and she's pretty unique to watch in action. My hair isn't long enough yet. She's actually pretty similar to Venom. The wall crawling, webs, the camouflage, the whole package. And if you saw the Venom movie, you got a chance to see Donna Diego, played by Michelle Lee, in action. So in the comics, she went pretty much 20 years without actually having a proper name. She didn't don the name Scream until the toy line from Toy Biz dropped the action figure in the 90s, titled Scream. It's a pretty cool looking action figure too, yellow with the red splats. I feel like it for sure scared some kids.
Starting us off at number 10, Venom. I sometimes feel a little bit bad about these symbiote lists. Venom, who's sort of the poster boy for the Clintar race, often ends up in the early numbers in our list. I mean, yeah, he's powerful, but compared to his offspring, thanks to the genetic rules of his race, he is the strongest Clintar on the block. And in terms of being the scariest, well, despite making one hell of an impression when he first hit the scene, beyond just being an alien costume, back in April of 1988 in the Amazing Spider-Man issue 299 and 300, he was utterly terrifying. These days, as an anti-hero, the character is arguably one of the more scarier looking superheroes of the Marvel Universe. But Venom and artist Todd McFarlane are largely to thank for the horrific aesthetic of the other Clintar characters, and all of the characters coming up on our list. The symbiotes have become utterly iconic and unmistakable in terms of appearance, and that's a legacy that continues to persevere in comics to this day. Up next, number 9, Mania/Maniac. The Mania symbiote first appeared in Venom Volume 1, Issue 1 in 2003. It was cloned from a piece of venom that was obtained by the Ararat Corporation, with the goal of using it to exterminate all life on Earth. Mania was a bit of a weirdo. It refused to bond with hosts and instead would just brutally murder them, just for the fun of it. At one point it bonded with a prison inmate named Eric Moody, and then jumped ship to an elderly mental patient named Alphonse Poigna. Moody managed to fight off Mania, but only for it to bond with Alphonse and then mock Moody about getting raped in prison after seeing his memories of the event, and then Mania raped and murdered Moody. So yeah, not the kindest symbiote on the block, clearly. It would later become Maniac, bonding with Lee Price, who had previously bonded with Venom. Price renamed Mania as Maniac after Price had ambushed the original host and badly injured her with the sonic cannon and flamethrowers, taking the symbiote for himself. Apparently Price is permanently bonded with Mania, using his immense willpower to remain bonded to the symbiote at all times.
Number 8. Hulk Venom. After a disagreement with Venom about the way to proceed in dealing with an even stronger Carnage, Venom leaves Eddie Brock to find someone strong enough to work with him, and he finds Bruce Banner. Venom immediately takes a new form, a combination of Venom and Hulk, that I'll call Venom Hulk. Venom Hulk proves more than a match for Carnage, but after entering the Venom Hulk's mind and depowering it to Bruce Banner, Carnage manages to absorb Venom, enhancing his power to an even greater degree. Alas, Hulk Venom was to be short-lived.
Up next at 7, Host Rider. Host Rider is, you guessed it, a Venomized Ghost Rider. Hailing from Earth TRN 647 and first appearing in Edge of Venomverse issue 3 in 2017, this Ghost Rider is Roberto Reyes, the version of the character who was possessed by his uncle's demonic spirit. When the symbiote bonded with him, it affected the control that he had learned to maintain over his uncle's spirit, which caused an imbalance, and Roberto, his uncle, and the symbiote all fought over who had control over Roberto's body. Eventually the spirit and the symbiote won over Reyes, calling themselves Host Rider in mockery of him. Host Rider has some pretty sweet abilities thanks to his Venom symbiote. The character can manifest a symbiotically augmented version of the Hell Charger directly from his body, which has a fanged mouth that operates as a grill, but can also devour Host Rider's victims. He also forms chains out of symbiote biomass, which is pretty neat. But like most on this list, he has an untimely end. The character dies in Venomverse issue 3 during the Poison Clintar War. Up next at 6, the Venomsaurus Rex. What happens when a T-Rex bonds with a Clintar? This big fella. That's what. While some of you might be like, dinosaurs are cool, consider how utterly horrific it would be to come face to face with not only a real-life dinosaur, but one with the bloodlust of a Clintar symbiote. Real-life dinosaur? Okay, sure, count me on board. But one that wants to eat my brains for sustenance? Yeah, might pass on that. There's not a whole lot to say about the Venomsaurus Rex, aside from the fact that it is a symbiote who bonded with a savage T-Rex, and it has made a handful of appearances in the Marvel Universe over the years, including in the Venomverse and in Old Man Logan. Up next, number 5, Carnage. Carnage has never been one to hold back, but that's also what makes him a bit vulnerable. He's kind of loose cannon at times, like a speeding train of violent chaos. Loose cannon, kind of vulnerable. Carnage first appeared in the Amazing Spider-Man issue 360 back in 1992. He was created with the intention of being a much darker version of Venom, a total psychopath who had no sense of morality. His host Cletus Cassidy was modeled after DC's Joker, and the character is often depicted as Venom's archenemy. So how did he come to be fiction-wise? Well, he's Venom's offspring. When Venom reattached to Eddie Brock in prison, Venom left its offspring inside the cell. Clintar have no emotional attachment to their offspring, so Venom didn't bother informing Eddie about it, thinking it was of no importance. That symbiote offspring then bonded with Cassidy, and Carnage was born, with their bond being even stronger than Brock's and Venom's. Carnage broke out of prison and started murdering left, right, and center, leaving the word Carnage at the scene of each of the crimes, written in blood, as one does.
Number 4, Knull, the god of the symbiotes. For real. So back it up way before life and creation, before time and the universe itself. I'm talking way back. Ancient malevolent deities awaited. Once the universe became a thing, Knull, the god of darkness, wasn't a fan of the company, and he set out to destroy the Celestials and went to war. So after forging this weapon called the All Black, which is a sword of living darkness, cool, and a Celestial's head, even cooler, after getting his handed to him, he figured out a new plan. He realized he can create symbiotes. What is he doing? Also, sir, can I have one, please? Thank you. So he actually manifested himself a symbiotic suit. Must be nice. And then went after all the gods. Bully. Speaking of bully, Knull actually went after the Silver Surfer in Silver Surfer Black. Side note, can we get a Silver Surfer movie like yesterday, please? He eventually arrived on Earth taking on the form of a dragon. Cool entry. Number 3, Endo-Sim armor. This symbiote armor was created by Tony Stark, model number 50 to be exact. Making its first appearance in Superior Iron Man Volume 1, the Endo-Sim armor is a liquid smart metal that forms around the host's body. It was actually inspired by symbiotes. So he uses the suit to fight you. It wraps around you, but you can't control it or host it. Ah, what a tease. The stuff is so strong though, it even held up against Storm, so pretty hard not to throw this one in the mix.
In at number 2, Knull. Knull may not look as scary as any of our previous numbers on this list initially, but it's more so his capabilities that make him utterly terrifying. Knull is often considered as the symbiote god. He's the deity that created the Clintars, an origin that was crafted in that 2018 Venom run. And long story short, Knull's existence predates that of the universes. Back when the Celestials had created the universe, Knull had some serious beef with them, and fought against them with a living sword called the All Black that was created from his shadow. He chopped off one of their heads and was cast back into the void by the other Celestials in retaliation. But Knull used that severed Celestial head to forge a symbiote sword and symbiote armor, right from the eldritch darkness that he commanded, and set out on a mission to kill all of the other gods. When coming out of the void, he landed on a desolate planet, and created an army of symbiotes, who would later rebel against him. They imprisoned him in the core of their planet, which they would call Clintar, which is their word for cage. So if that isn't enough to vouch for why this dude is scary, I mean, he's a literal god, who has divine physiology, is self-sustaining. He's immortal and has lived for over 13.7 billion years. He can shapeshift, create life, and also wants to commit mass genocide. So yeah, not an overly pleasant being to encounter. And finally, in at number 1, Knull. Knull is not only the newest symbiote to debut in the Marvel Universe on this list, but also the most powerful, all thanks to who it's bonded with. He's the god of symbiotes. So before we get into this number any further, heads up, this does contain spoilers for the recent Donny Cates and Ryan Stegman Venom run, so you've been warned. Alright, so in this Venom run, we're getting a bit of a retelling about the history of the Clintars. The first issue revealed that something called the God of the Symbiotes had awoken, and it kinda looked like a giant dragon when it first appeared. Essentially, his backstory is that Knull was a god who retaliated against the Celestials when they created the universe, and created a living sword from his own shadow, then used the Celestial's severed head to forge his symbiote sword in its cosmic energies, along with creating a symbiotic suit of armor from the eldritch darkness that he commanded. Essentially, he had manifested the first symbiote out of his shadow, so he could kill a Celestial. Knull's range of abilities are pretty vast. He has something called Unbrachonesis, which essentially gives him the ability to create, control, and manipulate a fount of eldritch darkness, which is a manifestation of the primordial void that existed before the universe, also known as the living abyss. So yeah, overall, pretty intense stuff. Now he can dominate symbiotes, being the divine progenitor of the symbiotes and the nexus of their hive mind. Now that means he can take control of Venom and essentially revert him to more primitive and aggressive behavior. Knull is immortal. He's lived for at least 13.7 billion years, is self-sustaining, has a regenerative healing factor, and all of the strength and durability that you can imagine. His one weakness though is divine electricity. He's vulnerable to it, so individuals like Thor can really him up real good, temporarily destabilizing him. Starting us off in at number 10, Anti-venom. It's the giant-sized Ant-Venom. This version of Scott Lang doesn't get a whole lot of page time in the Venomverse story arc, but is still quite entertaining all the same. So for context, the Venomverse was a limited series that occurred in 2017, which starred Venom, and took notes from the successful Spider-Verse story event, written by Cullen Bunn and drawn by Eben Colello, who had previously worked together on Deadpool and the Mercs for Money. It followed the story of a war between the Clintars and a new alien race that was introduced called the Poisons, who are their natural predators. Described as the biggest Venom story of all time, it started with Venom being transported to an alternate dimension to participate in this war, summoned by that Earth's Venomized Dr. Strange. Strange had summoned many other versions of Venom and his hosts to this Earth, including our pal Scott Lang. Essentially, Scott was a Venomized version of Ant-Man, who has all the same powers as the regular Scott Lang has, plus the added bonus of all the fun, horrifying things that the Venom symbiote is capable of. The character is prominently featured in the kidnapping of a poison version of Gwenpool in Venomverse issue 4, but unfortunately the character was eventually killed off in the Venomverse issue 5, and goes in a pretty tragic way. He was killed by his teammates as a means of preventing a poison from assimilating him, so I guess at least his teammates care about him. And at number 9, Hybrid. Hybrid ain't a pretty amalgamation, that's for sure. Hybrid is a combination of 4 of Venom's offspring: Agony, Phage, Lasher, and Riot. Having previously appeared in the Venom Lethal Protector series back in 1993, these symbiotes went through a bit of a rough time after they were defeated by Eddie Brock, and found themselves in the Vault, a prison for supervillains, being experimented on in a lab facility. After they had broken out of confinement, they fused together into a single symbiote and bonded with a host named Scott Washington, who was a guard at the Vault. They would later be defused, but would end up fusing once more during the Deadpool vs. Carnage series, defeating Carnage and then passing on from Deadpool to a dog that had been trained to bond with Lasher. Not the worst host one can get, that's for sure. Up next, number 8, Scream. In 1993, a Venom story arc came out called Lethal Protector. It followed the story of the Sinister Life Foundation and its leader, a scientist named Carlton Drake, who discovered a way to create symbiote soldiers by extracting something called seeds from the Clintar alien race, and growing them into fully formed symbiotes. Essentially, it was their offspring. The Life Foundation aimed to use these symbiotes as guardians. Their whole shtick was that they were preparing for something called MAD, which is mutually assured destruction. And they had a whole roster of wealthy clients who were paying for the Life Foundation to ensure that they would have comfortable lives if the world went to shit. Once Drake had kidnapped Eddie Brock and managed to forcibly extract these 5 seeds from Venom, he was able to bond the offspring with members of the Foundation's security force, one of which was named Donna Diego, who became the Yellow and Red Scream. She eventually was defeated by Eddie Brock and killed, but her siblings would outlive her and cause Brock a whole lot of trouble down the line.
Number 7. Dark Carnage. This guy may not be a totally new symbiote, but his powers and forms are, and they just keep getting stronger and stronger as the story goes on. So much so that the combined efforts of Captain America, Wolverine, and the Thing are useless against him. This version of Cletus Cassidy was briefly connected to the Dark God Knull, but that connection was broken when he ripped out Scorn's spine to consume the Codex, the trace elements of the Carnage symbiote left over from when she hosted it. Cletus decides to take part in helping to free Knull and begins to consume the codices of other symbiote hosts. This leads to him gradually growing in power until finally, after consuming Venom Hulk, he achieves his 5th form, resembling a devil. Dark Carnage proves more than a match for every opponent he comes up against. That is until
Number 6. Riot. So if you saw the Venom movie, then you're familiar with this next symbiote, or symbiote if you only watched the trailer. There aren't too many comic books about Riot, but being the villain of the 2018 live-action film, I can't not include this. Played by Riz Ahmed, Riot can actually contract blades and claws with his powers. He kicks ass, being one of the 5 Life Foundation symbiotes discovered from a comet. So once obtained, the symbiote attached itself to astronaut John Jameson, and then it eventually found its way to San Francisco when it found Carlton Drake, the CEO of the Life Foundation. The master plan? Well, to bring more symbiotes to Earth and eventually take over the planet. Papa No would be so proud. Who's that? He's just the dark god of all Clintars. I'll get into him later on. That is until Venom comes along and saves the day. Spoiler alert. I like Riot. I think he was pretty decent in the movie. Some have even said they prefer this adaptation of Riot over the comic book version. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Fight down below.
Up next, number 5, Venomized Logan. This Logan has the same origin of the one from Earth 807128. The one that killed the X-Men at the X-Mansion while under the control of Red Skull. This version though, years later, had been lured into a trap by Bruce Banner Jr., who he had raised as a son, but also lied to about his parentage. Along with Ashley Barton and Warren Worthington III, Banner Jr. tried to kill Logan, and use his remains to create an army of clones by utilizing the Venomized T-Rex that had survived an encounter with Black Bolt earlier. There's lots of details on this one that we're skimming over, so yeah, sorry, it's a big story. Anywho, the symbiote decided to jump ship from the dinosaur and bonded with Logan, who was then unable to kill Bruce Banner Jr. because he still saw him as a son, although the symbiote was like, do it. Logan would then be summoned by Doctor Strange and fought alongside our last number, although he was potentially killed in the explosion of the poisoned ship in Venomverse issue 5. And at number 4, Scorn. Scorn is the hybrid prothesis created from Carnage that combines both technology and the symbiote. Now in Carnage Volume 1 issue 4, Carnage is taken back to Earth after breaking out of the Raft prison by an American industrialist by the name of Michael Hall, who then locks up Cletus Cassidy and uses the symbiote to create new suits of armor. Carnage breaks out of its containment, bonds with a psychiatrist named Tanis Knives, but then things get a little weird. Carnage leaves his own offspring within Knives' prosthetic arm. Knives is horrified by this, cuts her arm off, but then later would rebond with it, becoming Scorn. Scorn is essentially a techno-hybrid, a machine symbiote who is able to fuse itself with different kinds of technology and mechanical weapons, which most definitely came in handy, no pun intended.
Number 3. Sleeper. Sleeper is the 7th spawn of Venom and was actually born from an unusual pregnancy. It attached itself to the Scorpion, but Venom and Eddie were worried that allowing it to bond so young might result in it becoming a monster like, well, nearly all the other symbiotes. So Venom and Eddie chose to leave it in the care of Alchemax. Sleeper has proven an ally of Venom and his family, having protected Eddie's son Dylan and Normie Osborn from the Phage symbiote while it was serving Carnage. Sleeper attempted to bond with Dylan, but Dylan's symbiote powers repelled him. Dylan managed to control Sleeper and shaped it into a wolf to attack Hybrid.
And at 2, Venompool. Deadpool has been bonded to the Venom symbiote prior to the Venomverse event. Back in the day, he had actually tried on the symbiote before Spider-Man had, something that was added into Deadpool's lore long after the symbiote had first appeared and bonded with Spidey in the Amazing Spider-Man issue 252. Anywho, according to Venomverse editor Devin Lewis, I quote, "Deadpool is one of our main Venomized protagonists. He's got so much heart and he's always a source of unpredictability, insanity, and goofiness," which, I mean, Sounds about right as far as Deadpool is concerned in like any reality. But he is right. Venompool is a massive part of the Venomverse arc, and because of his persistent insanity, he's one of the reasons why the Resistance is successful in overcoming the poisons. During the war, he noticed that when poisons took over Spider-Man, Spidey couldn't bring himself to kill the Venomized Spinneret, whose alter ego was Mary Jane Watson. This gave him an idea. He surrendered himself to the poisons, believing that a host's original persona still had some agency while being under their control. And he was right. His insanity gave him extra resilience to the poisons. So even after he was assimilated, his mind still remained his own, and he was able to suppress the poison that tried to take him over. He would then aid the Resistance in infiltrating the poison's hive, but was left for dead before Rocket's bomb went off. Finally, in at number 1, Carnage. Carnage may not be able to compete with a god in terms of power, but it would be criminal to not give the symbiote the top spot on our list. He's by far the most terrifying, nefarious, and sinister of the symbiotes, and has the aesthetic to match. Carnage has one of the most interesting stories of the symbiotes in the Marvel Universe too. Eddie Brock had landed himself in prison at one point, and had the unfortunate experience of having an individual named Cletus Cassidy as his cellmate. Cassidy was a psychotic murderer, serving 11 life sentences at the time. Now at this point, it was believed that the Venom symbiote was dead, but turns out he was just incapacitated. It eventually rebonded with Eddie once more, allowing him to break out of prison. But without Eddie knowing, Venom had done something. It left behind one of its spawn in the prison, which ended up bonding with Cassidy, making him the 999th naturally born symbiote. Thus, Carnage was born, and he was much bigger and much badder than Venom. Cassidy, being such a ruthless and contemptuous killer, made Carnage even more so, and over a period of several months he would go on a killing spree, leaving the words "Carnage rules" in blood at the scenes of his crimes. Carnage has been a long-lasting character in the Venom mythos, an antagonist to the character always trying to kill his father since first appearing in Amazing Spider-Man issue 345 back in 1991. In at number 10, Venom. While Venom may be the most iconic symbiote, and the first to make an appearance in the Marvel Universe, he's actually the weakest of the symbiotes. This is because he's the first of the bloodline. The offspring of a symbiote is much stronger than its parent, and since Venom was the first on Earth, all of the offspring symbiotes born from him are exponentially more powerful than he is. Each generation of symbiote is innately more powerful than its predecessor. That being said, it does come down to a matter of how you use it. Eddie Brock has always had a proficient amount of control over the Venom symbiote, and the other hosts that have worn Venom in the past, from Flash Thompson to Mac Gargan to Peter Parker himself, have all exhibited differences in the symbiote's functionality that are unique. Venom first hit the scene in the Amazing Spider-Man issue 252 back in 1984, first appearing as an alien costume that bonded with Peter Parker during Secret Wars. It wasn't until the Amazing Spider-Man issue 300, 4 years later, that Venom would take shape as Venom, and not just a parasitic symbiote. It bonded with Eddie Brock, who at the time wanted revenge against Peter Parker for ruining his journalism career.
Number 9, Carnage. What do you get when you mix a mentally unstable serial killer with the offspring of the Venom symbiote? Trouble. You get trouble. That's right, making his first appearance in the Amazing Spider-Man issue number 359, Carnage is a symbiote that is the offspring of Venom. Its host is none other than Cletus Cassidy. Cletus was sharing the same prison cell as Eddie Brock in the Amazing Spider-Man issue 344. So while Cletus was planning on stabbing Eddie Brock, just going red wedding on him, the Venom symbiote comes into the rescue, saves Brock. So after Brock is reunited with the Venom symbiote and breaks out, a little piece of the symbiotic material attaches itself to Cletus, thus becoming Carnage. Carnage is terrifying. I'm actually really looking forward to seeing him put in some work in the Venom sequel. Titled Venom, Let There Be Carnage. The director has said that just because the main villain is Carnage does not mean that it's R-rated. This has to be R-rated. We're looking forward to seeing him for that reason. That's like making Deadpool not R-rated. Just do it and do it right. Bam. Set to release summer 2021. Look forward to it. So, the malevolent Cletus Cassidy is being portrayed by Woody Harrelson, who is awesome, as you've seen him in anything. I also feel like Michael C. Hall would be good as Cletus. I don't know. Maybe it's the whole Dexter thing. He's got the vibe. Who knows? Are you looking forward to seeing Carnage on the big screen? Let us know in the comments.
Moving on to number 8, Rocket Raccoon. This Venomized version of Rocket Raccoon made its debut in the Venomverse as well, and is one of writer Cullen Bunn's favorite Venomized characters. In his home universe of Earth TRN 652, Rocket was a member of the Guardians of the Galaxy when he was bonded with Venom. But when the poisons attempted to assimilate all of the Guardians, he was forced to kill his best pal Groot when he was turned. Since then, Rocket had become a bounty hunter during the duration of the war, taking on contracts like killing his world's Captain America, which is where the story begins for him when he's transported by Doctor Strange. He easily found himself being one of the Resistance's tech experts, which involved him creating bombs to use against the poison threat, including the bomb that was eventually used to destroy the Hive's base.
Number 7, Hybrid. Okay, so once the Venom symbiote was taken by the Life Foundation, it was forced to create new spawns from its Clintar seeds. So these spawns were meant for these mercenaries to become super soldiers. Not a great plan. So as you can probably guess from the name itself, hybrid is a mix of 4 of these different Life Foundation symbiotes combined. And those 4 are being Riot, Phage, Lasher, and Agony. All these symbiotes combined sounds cool, but I mean, what do? Well, Scream uses this living tendril hair to choke out enemies, cool. Agony can spit acid, burning through pretty much everything. Lasher uses tentacles coming out of his back, and Phage forms blade-like weapons. So, what a combo. And in comes Scott Washington, a guard at the supervillain prison, the Vault. So we watched as these 4 symbiotes escaped their containment and they all temporarily bonded with him. Wow, okay, what a shift. So after these symbiotes fused with Scott, not only did he regain his ability to walk, nice, but he also discovered that they were not a threat and they were in fact in a lot of pain during all these experiments they were doing. Scott listened to his heart and set them free. Now, it's important to note that Scott Washington actually has a lot of anger inside of him. While normally the symbiotes would encourage the host to commit crimes and lash out, do it! Hybrid does the opposite. How lovely is that? Later on, while Washington is patrolling the streets, Eddie Brock actually paralyzed him with an electric shock, followed by a final bullet, killing Scott Washington in Venom number 4, issue 19. I'd watch this movie. I really hope we get to see Hybrid on the big screen soon, in a different way. I mean, all these voices swirling around Scott's head, that would be epic. You have to pick a good actor to do it though. So many voices, so little time.
Number 6. Legion. Eddie Brock, in an act of desperation after freeing the mind of Miles Morales, discovers that the Scythe device had harvested codices and chose to use them to create an alternate version of Venom known as Legion. After being tackled through the ground into the tunnel where Dylan Brock, Eddie's son, and Normie Osborn were hiding, Dark Carnage reveals his hand. No matter what Eddie does, Knull will reawaken, and thus, Eddie impales Dark Carnage with a Necro Sword, killing Cletus Cassidy and absorbing Grendel and Venom. Dang, that was a fun read. Anyone who says Venom is overrated hasn't read this.
Moving on to our number 5 spot, Scream. Scream fits the bill as one of the scariest symbiotes for both being aesthetically chilling and straight up batshit crazy. For starters, Scream was another of the Venom offspring characters to first appear in Lethal Protector, but unlike her 4 other siblings, she wouldn't survive into the later hybrid plotlines. Rather, she was killed off in Venom Volume 1, issue 15 in 2012, after Eddie Brock began to hunt down symbiotes. Brock trapped her by paralyzing her with a sonic emitter and then stabbed her multiple times in the head with a heated dagger. I mean, forget symbiotes, Eddie Brock should be at the top of this list. Dude gets gruesome at times. Anywho, Scream's host Donna had a history of psychotic episodes prior to her becoming one of the Life Foundation's hosts. After bonding with Scream, she attacked them all in California and was initially defeated by Venom and Spider-Man thanks to a metabolic accelerator. The Life Foundation managed to recover her and her siblings though, and later she returned, killing the hosts of the other symbiotes with a powerful psychic ability, thanks to Donna's schizophrenia apparently, and then framed Eddie Brock for all of their murders, which pissed off her symbiote siblings quite a bit. Needless to say, she's slightly unhinged. Up next, number 4, President Norman Osborn. Norman Osborn of Earth 138, or rather Ozzy Osborn, as is his nickname, is one sick motherfucker. Ozzy was the leader of a political regime in the US, and used his company Oscorp to develop something called Venom, the Variable Engagement Neurosensitive Organic Mesh. In other words, he used the Venom symbiote to make America great again, which is something that he literally says in the comic. His plan is to clean up the country with all of his goons using the Venom-modified symbiote to help perpetuate his fascist master plan. But luckily, the punk rock Spider-Man in this reality weakens them by using an electric guitar. While the character on his own may not be the most powerful fella on the block, although we assure you he can throw his weight around, what makes him so powerful is his legion of followers committed to his ideologies, which is pretty terrifying, to say the least. And at number 3, Anti-venom. Anti-venom first debuted in the 2008 story arc New Ways to Die in the Amazing Spider-Man 569. Now at the time, Eddie Brock was not bonded with Venom. He had cancer, and he got a job at a soup kitchen. His boss, a man named Martin Lee, aka Mr. Negative, had a healing touch, which then cured Brock of his cancer. So when Venom came along and tried to rebond with him, Brock's skin became caustic to Venom, causing him to be enveloped in a new white symbiote created from the remnants of Venom, which then merged with his white blood cells that were charged thanks to Mr. Negative. Anti-venom's got a slew of standout abilities. Brock was the host, he was immune to fire, heat, and sound-based attacks. Anti-venom also has a neat little nifty healing ability. He produces antibodies that can cure things like diseases, radioactivity, parasites, and the effects of drugs. Whenever he's around Spider-Man, he cancels out Spidey's powers. Now that being said, Anti-venom does come with his own unique weaknesses too. Concentrations of Norman Osborn's supervenom via Freak's DNA makes it incredibly vulnerable. And if touched by Mr. Negative, his healing abilities can become void. Brock would later sacrifice the symbiote to cure people from the Spider Island virus though.
Number 2, Red Goblin. Okay, so Green Goblin plus Carnage equals holy shit. Appearing in the Amazing Spider-Man 798, Norman Osborn steals the Carnage symbiote, and after that, well, all hell breaks loose. So thankfully, Peter Parker injected the serum into the Green Goblin, infused with nanites, just to help him, chill out. No more powers, no more crazy stuff. Shh, quiet time, that's it. Norman used the Carnage symbiote to eject all the nanites, but then that ended up creating this monster mash becoming, you guessed it, the Red Goblin. The rare weaknesses that the symbiote does have went away once the two merged. That's right, if you think you can use sound or fire to level this guy, think again. Green Goblin was fine with those things, so now the Carnage symbiote isn't even worried about it. Even the bombs that he throws are like these Carnage bombs that can bite you. They're all fused together. It's terrifying. Terrifying.
Number 1. Andy Benton as Scream. Scream is by no means a new symbiote, but her partnership with Andy Benton is. Andy Benton was a student at West Philadelphia High School, which eventually led to her becoming partnered with the symbiote Mania. During the events of Absolute Carnage, Carnage sent a horde of symbiote doppelgangers to kill her, as well as Patricia Robertson, who was currently taken over by the Scream symbiote. After Carnage impaled Andy on a meat hook in a processing warehouse, Scream attempted to rescue her, but was fatally injured. Abandoning Patricia's corpse, the Scream symbiote bonded with Andy, making her the new Scream. Andy has a somewhat tragic relationship with Scream, finding herself depressed and resenting sharing a headspace with the Scream symbiote. And I won't spoil, but so far, things have not ended well.